For nearly half a century, he was the face of an entire industry. The blonde mustache, the torn yellow bandana, the impossible muscles. That single finger pointed straight up at the sky, right before the roar. Hulk Hogan was not merely a professional wrestler. He was, for a whole generation, one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. So when the news broke that he was gone, the world stopped to mourn. But in the weeks and months that followed, a quiet and surprising truth began to emerge from the official record. The legendary champion had been waging a war that almost no one around him even knew about. And what authorities ultimately documented about his passing told a far more poignant story than anyone could have imagined. To understand why his death carried such enormous weight, and why the final report surprised so many, you first have to understand exactly who the world lost. He was born Terry Gene Bollea in Augusta, Georgia in the summer of 1953. He learned the business under a brutal taskmaster named Hiro Matsuda, who, as legend has it, broke the young man's leg in their very first session, just to test whether he had the stomach for this life. He did. Bollea clawed his way up through small territories under a string of forgettable names, enduring years of hard travel and harder nights until he finally became Hulk Hogan, a towering, golden-haired hero who seemed built for the brand new age of television. When he joined the World Wrestling Federation in 1983, he became the engine of a worldwide explosion. He headlined 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias. He held the championship for 1,474 consecutive days, the third longest reign in the entire history of the title. And in 1987, inside a stadium packed with more than 90,000 screaming fans, he did something everyone said was impossible. He lifted the near 500-pound Andre the Giant clean off his feet and slammed him to the mat. That single moment is still remembered as one of the most iconic scenes in the history of sports entertainment. By then, he was no longer just a champion. He was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. They called it Hulkamania, and for a while, it seemed to swallow the entire decade. His face was on lunchboxes, t-shirts, action figures, and even a Saturday morning cartoon. Children across the world copied his 3 famous demands: to train, say their prayers, and take their vitamins, and they believed every word of it. He became the first wrestler to truly cross over into mainstream celebrity, appearing on talk shows, in movies, and on magazine covers far beyond the wrestling ring. In an era before the internet, he was the kind of star you simply could not escape. Then, in the 1990s, he did something almost no hero ever survives. He turned villain. As Hollywood Hogan, the swaggering, black-clad leader of the New World Order, he flipped the entire industry upside down and launched one of the most profitable eras the business had ever seen. By the time the smoke finally cleared, he had been a world champion a dozen times over. One respected historian would later write that he had sold more tickets to wrestling shows than any man who had ever lived. But greatness like that does not come without a cost. For more than 3 decades, he hurled his enormous body off ropes, through tables, and onto unforgiving canvas. The human spine was never designed to absorb that kind of punishment, year after year after year. In the second half of his life, his body began to collect the bill. He endured a staggering number of surgeries on his back and his spine, so many that even he lost count, and in his final years, he moved with a cane, the famous spring in his step long since spent. The fans saw the immortal legend. They did not fully see the price he paid for it. And then, on July 24th, 2025, the news landed like a thunderclap. Hulk Hogan was dead. He was 71 years old. He had passed away at his home in Clearwater, Florida, the same sunny coastal town where he had lived for decades. Tributes poured in from every corner of the wrestling world and far beyond it. The machine that had run on his charisma for half a century suddenly fell silent. But here is where the story takes a turn that very few people expected. Because for someone so overwhelmingly public, so constantly photographed, so relentlessly talked about, Terry Bollea had somehow managed to keep one enormous thing completely hidden. In the days after his death, it came to light that the immortal Hulk Hogan had been quietly battling leukemia, cancer of the blood, and he had chosen to fight it almost entirely in private. When Florida authorities completed and released their final report on the cause of his death, the document confirmed what the rumors had only hinted at. The official cause was leukemia, the secret illness he had been carrying even as he waved to crowds and smiled for cameras. For a man whose entire career had been built on letting the whole world watch him, his final fight was the one he refused to put on display. He faced it the way he had faced every giant who ever stood across from him in the ring. Quietly, on his own terms. In the days that followed, his family gathered to say goodbye. A private funeral was held in early August at a church near his Florida home, and those who came to honor him painted a picture of a complicated, larger-than-life man. His wife Skye was there, so was his first wife, Linda. Figures from the wrestling world and far beyond it, including Triple H and Kid Rock, arrived to pay their respects. He was cremated afterward, in keeping with his wishes. Yet there were absences that spoke volumes. His daughter Brooke did not attend. Reports later suggested that the family dynamics in his final chapter were as tangled as any storyline he had ever performed, and that the man who once commanded arenas of tens of thousands had, in his private life, relationships far more fragile than his public image ever let on. Even his final wishes carried a note of controversy. Court records later revealed that he left behind an estate valued at more than $5 million, and that he had not named his daughter as a beneficiary. For fans who had watched him play the ultimate devoted family man on reality television, the real story behind those closed doors was stranger and sadder than anything scripted for the screen. In 2026, the wrestling world gave him one last honor. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame for a third time, this time posthumously, for that legendary match with Andre the Giant, enshrined forever as an immortal moment. It was a fitting final word for a man who had spent his entire life trying to live up to exactly that word. Immortal. There is something deeply human about the way Terry Bollea left this world. The man who could never stop the crowd from watching him made sure that his most painful battle was the one they never saw. He reminded all of us that even the largest, the loudest, the most seemingly indestructible figures among us are still, in the end, fragile, still human, still carrying wars the cameras never catch. So here is the question I want to leave with you. When you remember Hulk Hogan, what comes to mind first? The bandana and the championship belts, or the private man who fought cancer in silence while the world cheered his name? I want to hear your answer. Drop it in the comments below. If this story gave you a new way of seeing an icon you thought you already knew, share it with someone who grew up watching him. And subscribe, because the next story we tell might be the one that changes how you see a legend forever. Until next time, honor the people behind the personas, and never assume you know the whole story. I am Arif Hassan, and this is AH History.